Hey, hi everybody. Welcome to Helping Parents of Mentally Ill Children. My name's Bill MacPhee and I'm your host. I'm coming to you today from tonight, 9 p.m. Eastern Time, Sunday evening, August the 18th. I'm coming to you tonight overlooking the Buffalo skyline. I'm in Fort Erie, Ontario, Canada, and I live right at the mouth of Lake Erie and the Niagara River. And from Canada here in Fort Erie, I can see the skyline of Buffalo across the Niagara River. And if you follow the Niagara River down for around 20 miles, it turns into Niagara Falls, and you would go over the falls. So welcome tonight. Tonight we have a lot of good information to you. We're going to be talking about the three causes of schizophrenia. Basically genetics, biochemical, and stress. Before I do that, I just want to do a little bit of an introduction of myself, and then I'll explain my nose here. You probably noticed my nose that is a little bit cut up, and I'll tell you a story about that. But basically, my name is Bill MacPhee, and I was hospitalized 6 different times. I lived in 3 different group homes. I had a suicide attempt, and I spent 5 years on the couch, my parents' couch, basically doing nothing. I was very, very, very ill. I spent in 1987. I started a publication, or in 1994, I started a publication called SZ Magazine, which was a mental health magazine, and I published that for 23 years. And today I'm retired, and also today I am the author of this book called To Cry a Dry Tear, Bill MacPhee's Journey of Hope and Recovery with Schizophrenia. And I'll tell you how you can be able to get that later on as we wrap up tonight. So I told you about my nose, yeah. So basically last Sunday we had our church picnic, and I was out in the sun a lot. I thought I was under a tree with shade, but apparently the sun got through, and I burnt my nose quite a bit. And so that's why I have this sort of red nose, scab nose today. I told people today at church, I said, well, yeah, my nose is pretty messed up, but you should see the other guy. Just kidding. No, it was from the sun. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is the 3 causes of schizophrenia. Basically, we're going to talk about the 3 causes: genetics, biochemical, and stressor. But before I do that, I just want to clarify something from last week that I forgot to mention. Last week we talked about the difference between mental illness and physical illness, and we said that the difference between physical illness is that when if our bone was broken and there is blood outside of there, that we'd really see, we would see blood and would say our bone is broken, I need to get to the hospital and get that taken care of. But with mental illness, especially with illnesses such as schizophrenia, bipolar, paranoia, people who are delusional, basically what their mind is broken, so their brain doesn't know that it's sick, and they don't know they're sick. They have lack of insight, and that's basically the big difference between mental illness and physical illness. And just to give you a point, an example of that, I showed you. Like, you probably wonder, you'd say, well, how does somebody not know that they're mentally ill? How could they possibly not know that they're mentally ill? And they're talking to themselves, or they're acting their behavior, they act paranoid, but that person doesn't know they're ill. And an analogy that I gave last week was the fact that stroke patients, if somebody has a stroke, a lot of times if they go to the doctor, and the doctor will say, well, Mr. Jones, can you lift your right hand? And all of a sudden Mr. Jones will try to lift his hand, but it doesn't go up. But the doctor will say, Mr. Jones, I thought we told you that you would lift your hand. And he said, I did, doctor. And didn't you see it go up? And the doctor would say, no, I didn't. And that's the difference. The man thought, Mr. Jones thought that he raised his arm, and he didn't. Now, one example that I forgot to give you last week which is a very common, and make it simple. So you have lack of insight into your illness. You do not know your brain is sick. You say, well, how can somebody not really know that? Well, here's another analogy. How many of you have ever been in a crowd? Maybe you've been at church, or you've been at a sporting event or something, and the person next to you has body odor, really, really bad body odor, BO. And you say to yourself, this person stinks. How can they not know that they don't stink? How do they not know that they don't smell terrible? But they don't. They don't know that. They have lack of insight that they stink. Everybody else around them knows they stink, but that person themselves cannot smell it and does not know. And that's an analogy for, say, somebody who has a broken brain, or an illness that, like schizophrenia or bipolar, that they don't know that they're ill. Okay, so moving on. So let's go on into today's topic. So today's topic, we're going to talk about genetics. So there's kind of three legs to schizophrenia and bipolar too. Bipolar would fall into this, because bipolar, a lot of times people can be have lack of insight, or have not knowing that they're ill as well, and not knowing that they're sick. And so let's talk a little bit about the causes of these things. So basically, genetics and schizophrenia. Genetics basically mean that it's your DNA. We get the DNA, from your mother and your father, and we're part of them. We're not like them. We're actually part of them. For example, with genetics. So, say for example, you have little children, and the children would say you see your son walking in the backyard, right? And somebody will say, well, boy, that boy walks just like his father. He has that instinct that boy's walking just like his father. Well, the fact is, with genetics, he's not walking like his father. He's walking as his father, because the genetics are actually in that person, and it's that way that genetics work, that person is walking the way that they see that they are. So really, our genetics are part of us. They're right part of us. And with genetics, genetics happen in families where, because you have genetics, illnesses could be genetic. So for example, heart disease is genetic, diabetes is genetic, kidney disease could be genetic, cancer runs in families, that could be genetic, heart disease, different things like that. Hardened arteries through genetics and everything like that. So really, we have no control over the genetics, but it's passed down. And a lot of times, and this is very important, a lot of times people think about, oh, why did this happen to me? Why do I have schizophrenia, or why do I have bipolar? And my answer is, well, really, you know what? Why not? I mean, tragedy happens in everyone, in every family eventually. We may have, like I said earlier, we may have cancer, which is genetic, heart disease, kidney disease, high blood pressure can be genetic, all this kind of thing. So we can't continue to ask why. We just have to accept it and try to do the best of with what we got. So genetics is very important. And so, like with schizophrenia, the amount of prevalence for schizophrenia is, first of all, mental illness in general. 1 out of 5 people will have a mental illness, whether it be schizophrenia, depression, bipolar, obsessive compulsive disorder, eating disorders. So different mental illnesses. 1 out of 5 people will have a mental illness, and that's huge. That's huge. But with schizophrenia, what it is we say that 1 out of every 100 people throughout a lifetime will have schizophrenia. So 1 out of 100 in a lifetime. So that means that 1 out of 100 through a person's life. Now, what that means currently is that 1 out of every 250 people currently have this illness. Walking on the earth today, this illness is schizophrenia. So that means that, if you take 7 billion people, we might be getting close to 8 billion people on the planet. But if you take 7 billion people and divide that by 250, that's how many people that are currently walking around with this illness known as schizophrenia. And bipolar might be a little bit more prevalent than schizophrenia. So we say that 1 out of 100, 1% of the population in a lifetime, and with bipolar maybe 2, 3, and I had statistics say maybe as high as 4% of the population. But a lot of times bipolar, a lot of people can do very well with bipolar, whereas with schizophrenia, they have a little bit more of a challenge. And talking about genetics is that women get it's about evenly. Women and men equally get the diagnosis of schizophrenia, around 50% of women, 50% of men. So there's no discrimination that way. However, with women, women usually get hit a little bit later in life, and they fare a little bit different. They fare a little bit better than with men. Just the way they get a little bit hit. Usually that's because if they get hit later, say at the age of say 22, 23 or something like that, then they usually have they've done a little bit socializing. They've had their social life experiences, so they're a little bit social. They've had dating experience. When they're 24, they usually have, their schooling is almost done or is done. They may have a degree. Where with men, they get hit, say, when they're, say, 15, 16, 17, and as early teens or in the teen years, and that's when they don't have a chance of, they're usually not social. They don't have their social skills developed yet. They probably haven't had their first job or enough work experience, and they probably don't have an education or a trade with their schooling. And so men kind of don't do as well as women. Same with me, as I was diagnosed when I was 24 years old in 1987, and I was able to, I was hit a little bit later, and I had work experience. I knew what it was like to have a good quality of life, and I kind of wanted that back, and so that's why I fared well, even though because I got hit a little bit later in life. So I'm not saying that it's an easy illness, by no means. This illness of schizophrenia was the hardest thing I've ever gone through. Like I said, I was hospitalized 6 different times. I lived in 3 different group homes. I had a suicide attempt. I was 5 years on the couch dealing with depression. Very, very, very ill. Okay, so let's move on from genetics to biochemical. So a second cause of mental illness, a lot of times schizophrenia. Oh, well, let me just go back. Let me just go back and tell you about genetics. So in my family, my mom had bipolar. My brother, maybe a personality disorder. And then my mom's father, my grandfather, he was a little bit different. He didn't come out of his room very much and was kind of very antisocial, so there may be that. So mental illness does run in families. And so basically, if 2 parents have schizophrenia, then a child has the percentage of 50% chance of developing that illness through genetically. If only one parent has the illness of schizophrenia, then there's a 10% chance of them developing schizophrenia. So I have 3 children. So William, he's 31, and Dwight, 17, and Hannah Faith, she's going to be 15 in November. So none of them have the signs. I think that William, if he would have developed schizophrenia, he's at 31, so he's pretty well past the age of that. So he's probably pretty free. The chances of him getting it are slim, even though statistically it's 10%. And Dwight, it's only 17, and Hannah is 16. So hopefully they don't come down with illness, but they have a 10% chance of that, of coming down with that illness. And then if you have nobody in the family with the illness of schizophrenia, then what it is it's the general population of 1 out of 100 people. So your chance is 100, 1 out of 100 people can do that. And usually, in a family, if somebody has mental illness, usually you can trace it back to uncles or aunts or grandparents or something. Usually there is some mental illness in the family. Just again, you know, mental illness can run in the family, just like cancer runs in the family, high blood pressure runs in the family, kidney disease. We don't know why, but we just have to deal with what we got. We can't keep asking why we have this. And what else about genetics? So yeah, so that's about it. The general population, if none in the family, would be 1 out of 100. Okay, so let's move on to the second cause of schizophrenia, which is biochemical or chemical imbalance. And first of all, you know, the brain is a very complicated thing. We talk about, when they talk about biochemistry, we usually talk about like there's neurons and chemicals such as dopamine and serotonin that they talk a lot with mental illness, bipolar, and schizophrenia. They talk a lot about the serotonin and the dopamine. And the thing is, though, you know what? There's not a lot of really known about the brain. And we talk about those two chemicals, but in reality, we have over 300 different chemicals in the brain. But the reason why we call it that it's a biochemical illness is because we can know that it's treatable. Schizophrenia, bipolar, mental illness is treatable with medication. So, for example, in my case, when I was first ill, I was on different medications, and some worked, some didn't. Then I found one that worked. I found an injectable that worked, or I found a pill that worked, and it took my psychosis away. It brought me back into reality and everything like that. So as long as I kept my medication going, I was stable. However, I did go off my medication, and which 80% of people with mental illness will do. They'll go off their medication because we want to see, do we really have this illness? Was it a fluke? Is anything going on here? You know, it's like that. And so basically what we did is that biochemical, we knew it worked. I was stable and in reality. Then I went off my medication, and 6 months' time, I was walking the streets of Woodstock. I was walking over cars. I was getting beat up in the streets. I was banging on doors. Went back, relapsed, very, very ill, picked up by the police again, and taken to the hospital. So the fact that when I put a drug inside that I took a drug, whether it be certain pills or an injection, my symptoms cleared up. When I was off a medication, they come back. So that's why they say that it's a biochemical illness, and medications are very good for biochemical illnesses because they target, you know, certain chemicals in the brain such as dopamine and serotonin. And medication, the biochemical, you know, basically they're made out there. They're antipsychotic medications that are biochemical. And that's why we say the second leg of the cause of schizophrenia is biochemical. Okay, and these are very potent drugs. They're in the older days, and they're called antipsychotics, and antipsychotics came out in the 1950s, and way back then they were very what we called dirty drugs or not clean drugs. And what that means is that they had a lot of side effects. And in fact, a lot of times the side effects were shaking or tardive dyskinesia, which means the stiffening of people. People were like zombies and catatonic. And so they were very dirty drugs and had a lot of side effects. So really, some people would argue that taking the medication was worse than actually not taking the medication because of these side effects. So that's why we know it's biochemical. Now, today we have injectables. We have a lot of frontline medication that is very good. They're cleaner drugs. The thing is, it's just a trial and error situation that you have to do trial and error to find something that works for you. And you have to be constant taking medication. You can't be on and off, and it works sometimes, and then, you know, when you're on, you feel better, then you go off, because what can happen is that if you are stable or for a while and you're very stable, and then you go off a medication, and the next time you go back on it, it might not work as well as it did the first time. So that's the biggest problem with mental illnesses such as schizophrenia and bipolar, is that people go off their medication and they relapse. And they get feeling good, they get feeling better, and they relapse because they go off their meds. And I was talking about that biochemical, same with bipolar. Like, for example, a lot of you probably heard of lithium. Lithium was known as a miracle drug for bipolar because it really helped control the illness. Okay, so let's see where we go now. So that was the biochemical. Now the third leg was stress, stressor, and basically, stress is a triggering point. And there's different kind of stress that people go through. People go through stress, could be through divorce, marital situations. They could be getting married or something, which is a lot of stress. They may have a lot of stress at work. They may have a certain life situation where maybe they've lost a loved one, and that brings up stress. For example, my stress was when I was 24. I got a woman pregnant, and I didn't tell anybody. I suppressed that, and I didn't tell anybody. I kept it a secret, and it was eating at me and eating at me and eating at me. And because I had the genetic factor, the biochemical factor, and the stressor of that, things just blew up, and everything came to a really bad psychosis, and the start of my illness in 1987. So that was a stressor. Now, another thing that can be a stressor, doesn't need to be a lifestyle event or anything like that, but it could be drugs. If you're on drugs, illegal drugs, cocaine, even marijuana. Marijuana, I got to tell you, marijuana and a developing brain do not mix. And brains for teenagers, actually, the brain doesn't finish fully developing until you're around 27, until the person is 27. And when you get going with marijuana, and you have the developing brain, and if you have genetics in your family, and because of the marijuana affects the biochemical, and you have stress, you could come down with an illness known as schizophrenia or bipolar. I really tell you, I did a presentation with Dr. Len Cortese in London several years ago, and he said, I don't care. He says, if you're 30 years old, he says, smoke your brains out. He says, take as much marijuana you want. I don't care, to take as much as you want, but until the age of 27, because of the developing, stay away from it. And it's a good thing, because that could add, that's one of the stressor of that. So basically, again, so you have the biochemical, the stressor, and the genetics that are the three causes of schizophrenia. Now, I'm just going to wrap up here a little bit. We went through that. I just want to do a little bit of a plug, and then I'll tell you what we're going to talk about next Sunday. So first of all, if you get a chance, please share this. Please share this with anybody, and let people know that they can join our Facebook group. I'm here live every Sunday night at 9 p.m. and it's helping parents of mentally ill children. And just go to Facebook, type that in, and you can join. And we're going to do that. And in the meantime, if you have questions for me, even though I only do the broadcast once a week, I'm available all week through Twitter. I'm at Bill MacPhee 62 on Twitter. My email is billmcphee62@gmail.com, and then MacPhee is MacPhee, so Bill MacPhee 62@gmail.com. Feel free to ask me some questions. And what else? And if you want to go to my website, billmcphee.ca, you can find out more about us. And there's also more resources. I have over 350 videos on YouTube. So if you just type in my name, Bill MacPhee, in YouTube, my channel will come up, and you'll see 350 videos of where I'm teaching on different topics. What else? Twitter, YouTube, website, all that. We're here, and I'll plug the book one more time. So my book is To Cry a Dry Tear, Bill MacPhee's Journey of Hope and Recovery with Schizophrenia, and you can get that on Amazon.com, or you can come to my website, which I prefer, billmacphee.ca, and you can order your book. You can download it with a PDF or Kindle, and you can also buy a hard copy off of our website, and I'll be happy to sign that for you and send it out. So we're going to end here, and I just want to tell you next week we're going to talk about acute onset of mental illness and slow onset of mental illness, and one of them has a better outcome than the other. So we're going to talk about the causes of acute schizophrenia, the signs and symptoms of acute schizophrenia, and the signs and symptoms of slow onset schizophrenia. So you could know that if people around you are developing issues, you'll know the warning signs and know about that. So we're going to end here, and thank you for tuning in, and please share this, and have a great day. Bye-bye, everybody.